Wisdom Exchange 23. Yes, we're live. And we're going to talk about today how to communicate consciously. Because as we've seen, as human beings, as Homo sapiens, we have got here by our ability to form groups, to form cohesive clans, and how we communicate consciously is really the basis of how we operate our lives and our relationships. So, how do we do that when often we hear phrases like, I feel like I'm talking to a wall, or things like this? We're always talking in our work, in a family setting, in a friend setting. So, of course, I don't do this 100% correct, but through coaching, through learning about this, there are certain tools and models I'd like to introduce today, and also archetypes from psychology, from Carl Jung, that I'd like to go through and take you through on this journey on how we can see ourselves in a communication pattern and how we can become more conscious of what is happening to us if we're caught in a power struggle and an unconscious power play, or we ourselves are victimizing ourselves as well. So this will hopefully help you understand where you are, where you're communicating from, and how you can communicate to others. So let's start by first going very simply two human beings. And two human beings are going about their life every day. But what happens is one human being has an expectation of another one. So it could be anything from doing a certain work piece or carrying out certain balance of their relationship. They expected them to do something, whether it be a parent to a kid picking a subject at school, or I don't know, grandma to a child wanting to then get married, or maybe a kid to a parent expecting something from them, or two colleagues wanting to pick up the workload. So let's have a look at these two human beings. And the first human being basically says something and has put an expectation over the other human being. So it could be like, you should have done this, or you should have done that, or you shouldn't have done this, and you shouldn't have done that. So that's coming from the paradigm of human being number one, right? And so that, if you've looked at before the internal family systems that we've been through, we realize that human beings are not just one part, but we're complex. Sometimes we make mistakes, sometimes we're a bit unconscious, but we're all made up of these different parts, and the self is in the middle. And so what can happen, and another model is transactional analysis, where you have a parent, which is split into the critical and nurturing parts, and you have the child, which is then split into that free part and the conformed part. But then you have the adult in the center, right? And so what happens is when we become unconscious, person number one, when they become unconscious, hello, one person watching, we're talking about communication. So when person number one becomes unconscious and they put their paradigm, their expectation of what should occur, person number one can say things like, you're useless, or you're absent minded, or place a label on person two. So you can see how from that person's worldview, they've put a label under person two. So this could be a simple example, like at work, you should have done this work. You're lazy. So this lazy label or useless, this lazy or useless label has come person two. So that person has a reality, and that person didn't meet the reality, right? And so that person has been encapsulated. Now, this is the interesting part. Does person two recognize that they have been labeled and that they have been stuck in this person's paradigm? So when someone comes to them for work and saying you're lazy or you're useless, do they recognize before they start saying, I am lazy and I am useless, or I'm not lazy and I'm not useless? Do they recognize that person one is putting an expectation on them? So you may even find you feel relaxed when you're around some people, or when you're around other people, you can feel uptight because subconsciously they have an expectation of you. So going through my research of South Asian diaspora, there can be a heavy expectation from other generations downwards to complete certain life events, whether it be um, choosing certain subjects or degree streams, whether it be going into a certain marriage structure, or even buying a certain house or leading a life a certain way. They're all expectations. And then that wraps around person two. Now, person two can stay in their own power when they realize what they want and when they realize where person one's paradigm is. But what happens is, if person two goes out in the world and they encounter someone and that person calls them lazy or useless, that can go back to their childhood mindset and they can get triggered into this paradigm, right? They can get triggered into this paradigm. So it's up to person two to realize that they're not part of the system that person one. And it can be easy if someone comes up to the street and says you're stupid, and you're like, okay, I'm clearly not, right? And that person is just weird. Or if you come back from holiday and you come back to work and everybody's working away and you feel like, whoa, what's going on here? You feel like you shouldn't be working at such a high pace. You should be taking it easy. But everybody's in this paradigm, and slowly you might be feeling that you're not good enough, and that you need to work harder and harder. So you can see how this paradigm comes into play. And so we as person two, for example, have to know where we are operating from, and that requires a deep level of know thyself, and knowing where you're coming from. So we spent 8 minutes, but that's quite a good depth to get to, because I really wanted to explain that in depth. So then, if you've not known where you're coming from and you do accept these labels of I'm lazy, I'm useless, then we're going to now go into the drama triangle. And this unconsciously happens in many situations, the drama triangle. And so we're going to explore this a bit if you just want to remain conscious in your communication. And of course, this will change depending on your communication style, etc. But we're going to look at three main positions in this drama triangle during communication with your loved ones or co-workers or friends. So the first one is called hero and rescuer. And what the hero rescuer does is they try to seek temporary relief, and they're very righteous. And they might come in, and for example, if they see somebody in this scenario, person number three could come in. Yep. Person number three could come in and say, it'll be okay, let me take over, poor you. No, you shouldn't be part of this, like they can come in and have a hero or savior complex and try to save. This is an unconscious mode. So the second unconscious mode is going to be the villain or the prosecutor. So now in the drama triangle, you'll see at the top, there is the villain and the prosecutor. And the other one, you have the hero and the rescuer, right? So the villain in this scenario, so would be, so in that one and two might see one as the villain because they're blaming the other person. It's your fault. You're to blame. You know, um, you're useless. They number two is seeing number one as the villain, right? And so the third part is based out of fear, and that's called the victim. And so the victim might say, "Oh, I don't have enough time. There's nothing I can do. It's too hard. I have to do this." So they might be like, "I am useless. I need to help you." Or, there's nothing I can do. They just feel so powerless in this scenario. They might feel hurt. And again, that's unconscious because they're not stepping into their own power. So we have this drama triangle. And what can happen is um, then the victim can start to become the villain. The victim can start to say, you know, you're being mean, blah, 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 blah. And they start to become the villain. And then the villain can become the victim. So you can start to have this switch around in this drama triangle. So it's based on righteousness, fear, and blame. And this thing just creates a whole cycle or triangle of guilt, of shame, of blame, basically. And this can happen in a lot of places and is very well known. So we're going to delve into this a bit deeper now that we've established how this can happen in a very simple conversation. If we're not aware, we can get sucked into the worldview of others and sort of battle against the worldview of our others rather than just letting the other person sit there and then coming from our perspective consciously. So we'll have a look into this more deeper because when we see the unconsciousness happening, we can start to step out of it. So again, we're going to see the hero seeking temporary relief, the villain, and the victim, and they're at the effect. So again, the person number one and person number two, one is blaming two, and for example, number three steps in. Three says, "Oh no, I can help you, victim," and they're the villain clearly, and so the hero starts to say to the villain, "It's your fault." Blah blah blah. Look at this poor victim. And so now the villain becomes the victim and the hero becomes the villain to the victim, right? And so now the victim might actually go into a hero position of trying to save the villain, saying it's not his fault, blah, 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 right? You can see this happening in family scenarios, etc., or even work scenarios, or even it can get so complex across countries, right? So if you imagine countries at war and someone steps in to be a hero, right, to the smaller country, for example, you can see this playing out. And so this will start to occur unconsciously. And so if we want to be in the adult position, if we want to be in a self position, we have to notice this drama triangle occurring. Are we being righteousness? Are we placing blame on people? Are we fearful of other people? So this is really at the basis of the human ego and the human subconsciousness as well, the way we get triggered and the way we react. And so, yeah, I think I'll move on now into the next stage. But this is just important. Just try to notice what scenarios have you been in when you've been blaming another or what scenario have you been in where you've been a victim per se, and you don't feel you're in power, and what scenario do you feel in where you've tried to be a hero and stepped in, right, and tried to save somebody who doesn't particularly need saving. And so we're going to go now into this anxiety-based problem focused. called Karpman's drama triangle that we just seen. The rescuer, the hero, it's flipped now. The rescuer, the hero, the persecutor, and the victim. But now, how can we empower ourselves? The empowerment dynamic, or TED. So how do we empower ourselves? We have to, again, slow down, step out of the paradigm person number one has placed, step out of the comments that may be triggering, and knowing, always coming from a place of passion, of slowness, of love, knowing that you come from a place of wholeness and that you are a good human fundamentally and that you are whole, and that makes us conscious. Then we can see the other person as that. And now when we step out of this triangle into the empowerment dynamic, we can look into this creator, challenger, or coach. So you can start to see how this triangle is flipped upside down. And so we're still taking on similar roles, but now they're conscious. And so what does it exactly mean? So if I zoom in a little bit, the creator is no longer like a rescuer. They're not enabling, they're not meddling, they're not imposing or intervening or fixing and saying, I am good. Sorry, we'll start at the rescuer first. The hero, the rescuer, I am good. They start to not to become this hero and saying, I'm going to save you, but they start to become this coach. They start to ask, do you need help in this scenario? They're encouraging, they're supportive, they're facilitating, they're listening, they're inspiring, and they're caring. So person number 3 would come in from a non-judgmental point of view, not just saying that you are a victim, but okay, do you need help from me? I will listen to you. I will provide space for you. And so the rescuer becomes the coach. So if you're trying to go in and save someone, I'm training as a coach. If you're trying to go in as fixing someone, that is not really coaching. You're trying to be a rescuer. You're just trying to have that space to facilitate, to listen. So what does that look like? If there's a family member conversation or there's a workplace conversation, we're not going in and trying to be a savior or rescuer, but instead maybe we're going to take someone to the side and say, would you like me to help here? Would you like me to listen to you here? That's coming from a very conscious space, and maybe allowing that person then to come into that conscious space. And if they can, or if they don't want to, then just leaving at that. So then that takes away the self-righteousness of the rescuer as they become a coach, a listening ear. Next, the victim. So number 2 that we looked at, who wasn't able to come out of their paradigm and accepted the other person's paradigm. They felt powerless, helpless, alone, numb, and indecisive. They're seeking rescue. They are, avoidant. They're saying, I'm blameless. And they feel ashamed. They're indecisive. They're feeling a bit useless. And yeah, they're just feeling victimized. And, it's not my fault. But what can they do? They can actually become a creator. They can actually express their paradigm to another and say, hey, they can become a bit radical and saying, hey, I know that this is your situation, but my vision is we can go together and we can actually achieve this vision where this is a win-win scenario. They can focus on, they can resolve their own emotions, but they can focus at the situation at hand. They can accept the other person and be vulnerable. I am feeling a bit hurt here. I actually have this experience from my childhood, or actually I have this vulnerable experience that I don't feel confident in this area. They're a bit passionate. They're a bit wise as well. They're not victimizing themselves, but they're saying they're taking responsibility for their feelings. They're taking active responsibility and saying, I am feeling a bit helpless and alone here. They're not saying, I'm helpless, I'm alone, I'm a victim, but they're actually acknowledging their emotion, but with wisdom, and then being vulnerable and expressing that in a creative sense. And then instead of to begin with. Number one, coming in and saying you should be doing this or you should be doing that, instead of blaming or being critical, rigid or superior or oppressive or defensive, and saying that they're right. The challenger might start to say, hey, these are my boundaries. I just want to make sure that in our relationship, we are being a bit constructive here. And, but I'm open to flexibility, like how you're feeling right now. So it's not stepping on eggshells, but it's not also trying to blame someone, but they're actually holding their boundary and they're saying, it might just seem natural when you're talking to someone like, oh, excuse me, I would like this. But actually, when your workplace scenario and maybe you're feeling the workload's a bit heavy, you might be wanting to criticize someone. Or when you feel like someone's not pulling their weight, you might want to criticize someone. But actually, just being a bit accountable and taking responsibility and being able to healthily challenging someone. But we can be operating from a certain paradigm. But if we think we're being a challenger, someone else might think we're being a prosecutor. So it can be easy where we're trying to be a challenger and someone takes on the victim mindset. And we have to then maybe take a step back. Because what happens is if someone starts becoming a victim or starts to become a prosecutor themselves, then that can make us slip into the drama triangle too. So sometimes being a creator, being a coach, being a challenger, you have to be careful that you yourself might not fall into a unconscious role. So if we find that we're talking to a wall here, and very nicely in the first illuminating dialogue, my friend Lav said if one reality is here and one reality is here, and they're not meeting each other, being able then to step back and say, I've done my bit consciously. And that's very hard to get to. Because if we are a challenger and we're not being flexible and we're trying to say this is a logical way and, I really want this to work. If another person is not really able to meet us there or being a bit stubborn or unconscious, or maybe they're feeling triggered and victimized, we also have to realize that in the other. And so that also speaks to groups of families talking to other groups of families, or groups of cultures talking to other groups of cultures, or countries talking to other countries. Realizing these perspectives, if we are pushing other people into unconsciousness, or when people are falling into unconsciousness themselves based on their previous patterns. So wanted to lightly hold these patterns, and hopefully that's clear to you how we can fall into these settings. And I just want you to visualize yourself in each of these three scenarios and then coming into a more open scenario. So a creator, coach, and challenger in each version. And then if someone is still being in that unconscious gray zone, how are you then able to step back? Okay. So that was the victim triangle, some examples of that paradigm, how it can be used in a domestic and workplace setting, and how we can really step into our power by realizing the intensity maybe and the pull into the unconscious. But how can we really be conscious and state the boundary, but not be too harsh, be a bit flexible there. And so I just want to end on how we can notice not just these patterns within us. Yep. Not just notice these patterns within us of prosecutor, rescuer, victim, but also where can we come from based on our personality? Where do we tend to fall towards based on our, age group or the way we are operating in our current world? So I just want to share my screen again and talk about Carl Jung's archetypes. So Carl Jung was a psychologist in, I think, roughly the 1930s, 1940s, and he coined these archetypes that showed up in every mythology. And it's a universal experience. So the concept of archetypes is a key aspect of Jung's theory of the collective unconsciousness, which suggests that there's universal experiences that are inherent to the human experience. So what we mean by collective unconsciousness means that in the unconscious of everybody, these archetypes exist. And archetypes just means a type that has a primal pattern or a source pattern, right? That can be distilled to its source. And this will make more sense as I explain. So it can be inferred from various cultural phenomena such as stories, art, myths, religions, and even dreams. So even if you have a dream, you'll see these certain things coming. In stories, these things will come up over and over, no matter where in the world you are, in myths as well. So let's go through these and see how these come up, for example, in your dreams or in your stories that you've seen, whatever culture you're from. So the innocent person, for example, Tinkerbell and Peter Pan, to be happy, but they're too trusting and they're very open-minded, right? The orphan, they want to belong, they're a bit cynical, they're open, and they're a realist. The hero, they want to belong, but they need to fight and they have to have courage. Classical Marvel movies. The caregiver, they help others, martyrdom, compassion, kind of like the savior or like the messiah. The explorer, full of life, they're wondering, they want autonomy, so Indiana Jones. The rebel, they change the norms, but crime, and they're wild and they're free, like that crime person, but they want to change the norms, that rebel character in the movies, that lover like Casanova, they've got that, their goal is a relationship, but they're like people pleasing, all they want is friendship. That creator, that artist, that visionary, they realize a vision, but they're a bit of a perfectionist, and their skill is their imagination. A jester, a joker, just lighten up, but they waste a lot of people's time, and their skill is humor. And all these archetypes play in us, by the way. That old sage, you imagine Gandalf or Dumbledore, they have wisdom, but they don't act, and they're very intelligent. The magician, they're transforming. They're a bit egotistical, however, but they want for win-win scenarios. And the ruler, prosperity, authoritarian, and they have leadership, so they might be a bit strict. Like you imagine your classic ENTJ from the Myers-Briggs scenario. So bearing these archetypes in mind, and bearing in mind that they're distilled in dreams. So thousands of people had their dreams analyzed and the myths analyzed, and these archetypes seem to come in a lot. So think of stories, think of how these archetypes come in. And now think about these archetypes in the drama triangle, how you might be embodying one archetype more than another in your life, and how that could come up in the drama triangle, right? So let's go a bit deeper into this. So Carl Jung said, I must also have a dark side if I am to be whole. And we realize this when we shout or when we're a bit avoidant, that's a bit of our dark side because it's not who we want to be, right? And so exploring our dark side can allow us to be more confident in a situation. So there are many archetypes as there are in typical situations in life, right? So we're not just restricted. But there's endless repetition has been engraved in these experiences in our psychic, so our mind, and it's not in the form of images filled with content, but at first only as forms without content, representing possibility of a certain type of perception or action. So that just means that all of the most powerful ideas of history goes back to archetypes. It's really a source or primordial image, whether it be a demon or a human that we see in all these poetry and stories, or a mythological figure, but it really just represents the joys and sorrows that has been repeated countless times in human history, right? So again, like a ruler, like the monarch, you'll see like the queen on the coin, creator, sage. So let's just imagine this, that you are a caregiver, like a mum, right? And you see someone else in a drama triangle. They might be more of a explorer, right? But because you're in a caregiver mode and that's your mindset and worldview, you might see them as a neglector, but they don't see that. But then they're pulled into a neglector scenario, right? So you can see how these archetypes, we can be embodying these archetypes without knowing it. We can be this innocent person over here and righteous. And we might be saying, I'm very innocent and very righteous, but you are guilty and wicked. Or this drama triangle could be happening inside, where somebody called, we think we're very innocent and that's the archetype we're holding on to. But somebody calls us guilty, or somebody even points out a criticism, but because we're holding on to this innocent, we think we're guilty, and we have this drama triangle happening inside of us where we're criticizing or we're victimizing ourselves, and that just repeats. So somebody might just be giving a criticism from another point of view, even without being an archetype, but we might be holding on to an archetype and then calling ourselves guilty, right? So you can see how all of these archetypes can play into each other. We can be holding on to archetypes and even casting archetypes onto other people without knowing. Like, oh, he's such a rebel, or, he's such a monster, or you might see that people, oh, they're such dictators, in my life. They're so inflexible. But actually, they see themselves as rulers and monarchs and leaders. So you can see how people can view themselves in some ways and others. And actually, each side has a dark side. And realizing that if you're embodying this caregiver archetype, we can also be we can also be having a dark side to us, where we have a neglecting side. So maybe we're caring for others, but we're neglecting ourselves, right? Maybe we are trying to be a ruler and make everything in order so we feel good and we're feeling we're in charge, but everyone else sees us as a dictator, right? Maybe we're trying to be innocent and cover up and be self-righteous, but we're actually guilty. Or maybe it's the opposite. So coming in terms of our dark side and balancing this can actually help in terms of the drama triangle. So hopefully this is all not to confuse you, but just light tools, and hold them lightly in the space that we're talking, just to apply them for our life. So the idea is not to make you understand these tools in depth, but rather have these tools to be able to overlay in our life and then realize, oh, in this conversation, am I being a bit unconscious here? Am I, in this archetype here? Because these archetypes have been studied and these are there in the human subconscious. But when we're acting out in our everyday life, it's just how to make us more conscious when we're communicating. So again, it's not just to understand these tools or psychological models in depth, but really just to apply them to our life and see where we could just be a bit more conscious and how we can live our life a bit more in harmony with these archetypes. So if you are interested in understanding the way you communicate, the way you communicate to others, maybe certain challenges in your communication, or how you would just like to leverage your certain personality, your unique way of operating in the world, your unique gift set, then I'll post a personality package below. There's 5 free tests like the DISC, tests like Myers-Briggs, which shows you all about the cognitive functions and how you operate in the world, like the Enneagram, which shows your underlying motivations in the world. And it can be hard once you've done the test to understand the depth of how it relates to you fully. So if you want a free conversation, just click the link below in that personality package. You can then book a link to talk 1 hour to me in a free strategy session, or just drop me a DM on Instagram and we can talk about certain life scenarios and also your personality type, how you can leverage that in your work and outside of your work so you can become a more powerful and conscious version of yourself. So that's all for today, Wisdom Exchange 23. I hope you enjoyed how to communicate consciously. Thank you again, everybody, if you watched all of this. And I will see you all next time. Have a nice day. Bye, everybody.